Let's start with the continue with the chapter 10, India after independence. Okay, this is the last chapter of our past 3, a new and divided nation. Okay, when India became independent in August 1947, it faced a series of very great challenges. Okay, as a result of partition, 8 million refugees had come into the country from what was now Pakistan. These people had to be found homes and jobs. Then there was a problem of the princely states, almost 500 of them, each ruled by Maharaja or a Nawab, each of the whom had to be persuaded to join the new nation. The problems of the refugees and of the princely states had to be addressed immediately. In the longer term, the new nation had to adopt a political system that would best serve the hopes and expectations of its population. Mahatma Gandhi ashes being immersed in Allahabad, February 1948. Less than 6 months after independence, the nation was in mourning. Matlab rone mein. On 30 January 1948, Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated by a fanatic Nathuram Godse because he disagreed with Gandhiji's conviction that Hindu and Muslim should live together in harmony. That evening, a stunned nation heard Jawaharlal Nehru's moving statement over All India Radio. India's population in 1947 was large, almost 345 million. It was also divided. There were divisions between high caste, low caste, between the majority Hindu community and Indians who practiced other faith. The citizens of this vast land spoke many different languages, wore many different kind of dress, ate different kind of food and practiced different profession. How could they be made to live together in the one nation state? To the problem of unity was added the problem of development. At independence, the vast majority of Indians lived in the villages. The farmers and the peasants depended on the monsoon for their survival. So did the non-farm sector of the rural economy. For if the crops failed, the barbers, the carpenters, the weavers, and other service groups would not get paid for their services either. In the cities, the factory workers lived in the crowded slums with little access to education or health care. Clearly, the new nation had to lift its masses out of poverty by increasing the productivity of agriculture and by promoting new job creating industries. Unity and development had to go hand in hand. If the divisions between different sections of the India were not healed, they could result in the violent and costly conflicts. High caste fighting with the low caste, Hindus with Muslims, and so on. At the same time, if the fruits of the economic development did not reach the broad masses of the population, it could create fresh divisions. For example, rich and poor, cities and the countryside, regions of India that were prosperous and the regions that lagged behind. Franchise क्या होता है? Right to vote. The constitution is written. Between December 1947, 1946 and November 1949, some 300 Indians had a series of meetings on the country's political future. The meetings of this Constituent Assembly was held in New Delhi, but the participants came from all over India and from the different political parties. These discussions resulted in the framing of the Indian Constitution, which came into effect on 26 January 1950. One feature of the Constitution was its adoption of the universal adult franchise. All Indians above the age of 21 would be allowed to vote in state and national elections. This was a revolutionary step, for never before had Indians been allowed to choose their own leaders. In other countries, such as the United Kingdom and United States, this right had been granted in the stages. First, only men of the property had the vote. Then men who were educated were also added on. Working class men got the vote only after a long struggle. Finally, after a bitter struggle of their own, American and British women were granted the vote. On the other hand, soon after independence, India chose to grant this right to all citizens regardless of their gender, class or education. A second feature of constitution was that it guaranteed equality before the law to all citizens, regardless of caste or religious affiliation. There were some Indians who wished that the political system of the new nation be based on Hindu ideals and that India itself be run as a Hindu state. They pointed to the example of Pakistan, a country created explicitly to protect and further the interest of a particular religious community, the Muslims. However, the Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was of the opinion that India could not and must not become a Hindu Pakistan. Besides Muslim, India also had large population of Sikhs and Christians as well as many Parsis and Jains. Under new constitution, they would have the same rights as Hindus, the same opportunities when it comes to seeking jobs or environment or private sector, the same rights before the law. A third feature of constitution was that it offered special privilege for the poor and most disadvantaged Indians, the practice of untouchability, described as a slur and a blot on the fair name of India, was abolished. Hindu temples open to only the high caste were thrown open to all, including the former untouchables. After a long debate, the Constituent Assembly also recommended that a certain percentage of seats in legislatures as well as jobs in governments be reserved for the members of the lowest caste. It had been argued by some that untouchables or they have were not known. Harijan candidates did not have good enough grades to get into the prestigious Indian Administrative Service. But as one member of Constituent Assembly, H.J. Khandekar, argued, it was the upper caste who were responsible for the Harijans being unfit today. Addressing his more privileged colleagues, Khandekar said, "We were suppressed for thousands of years. You engaged us in your service to serve your own ends and suppressed us to such an extent that neither a mind nor a bodies and nor even a heart works, nor are we able to march forward." Along with the Along with the former untouchables, the Adivasi scheduled tribes were also granted reservation in seats and jobs. Like the scheduled caste, these Indians too had been deprived and discriminated against. The tribals had been deprived of the modern healthcare and education, while the lands and forests had been taken away by more powerful outsiders. The new privilege granted them by the Constitution were meant to make amends for this. The Constituent Assembly spent many days discussing the powers of central government versus those of the state governments. Some members thought that the center's interest should be foremost, only a strong center, it was argued, would be in a position to think and plan for the well-being of the country as a whole. Other members felt that the provinces should have greater autonomy and the freedom. A member from the Mysore feared that under the present system, democracy is centered in Delhi and it is not allowed to work in the same sense and spirit in the rest of the country. A member from Madras insisted that the initial responsibility for the well-being of the people of the provinces should rest with the provincial government. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, respectively referred to as Baba Saheb, belonged to a Marathi-speaking Dalit family. A lawyer and an economist, he is best known as a revered leader of the Dalits and the father of the Indian Constitution. Uh, the initial responsibility for the well-being of the people of the provinces should rest with the provincial government. The Constitution sought to balance these competing claims by providing three lists of subjects: union, with subjects like tax, defense, foreign affairs, that would be the exclusive responsibility of the center; a state list of subjects such as education and health, that would be taken care of principally by the states; a concurrent list under which would come subjects like forest and agriculture, in which the center and the states would have joint responsibility. Another major debate in the Constituent Assembly concerned language. Many members believed that the English language should leave India with the British rulers. Its place, they argued, should be taken by Hindi. However, those who did not speak Hindi were of a different opinion. Speaking in the assembly, D.T. Krishna Nachari conveyed a warning on behalf of people of the South, some of whom threatened to separate from India if Hindi was imposed on them. A compromise was finally arrived at, namely, that while Hindi would be the official language of India, English would be used in the courts, the services, and the communications between the one state and another. Many Indians contributed to the framing of the constitution, but perhaps the most important role was played by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was chairman of the drafting committee, and under whose supervision the document was finalized. In his final speech to the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Ambedkar pointed out that the political democracy had to be accompanied by economic and social democracy. Giving the right to vote would not automatically lead to the removal of other inequalities such as between rich and poor or between the upper and the lower caste. With the new constitution, he said India was going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one value. In a social economic life, we shall, by the reason of a social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. The Poti Siramullu, the Gandhian leader who died fasting for a separate state for the Telugu speakers. How were the states to be formed? Back in the 1920s, the Indian National Congress, the main party of the freedom struggle, had promised that once the country won independence, each major linguistic group would have its own province. However, after independence, the Congress did not take any steps to honor this promise, for India had been divided on the basis of religion. Despite the wishes and efforts of Mahatma Gandhi, freedom had come not to one nation but to the two. As a result of partition of India, more than 1 million people had been killed in the riots between the Hindu and Muslims. Could the country afford further divisions on the basis of language? Both the Prime Minister Nehru and Deputy Prime Minister Vallabhbhai Patel were against the creation of linguistic states. After partition, Nehru said disruptions tendencies had come to the fore. To check them, the nation had to be strong and united, or as Patel put it, the first and last need of India at the present moment is that it should be made a nation. Everything which helps the growth of nationalism has to go forward, and everything which throws obstacles in its way has to be rejected. We have applied this test to linguistic provinces also, and by this test, in our opinion, they cannot be supported. That the Congress leaders would now go back on their promise created great disappointment. The Kannada speakers, Malayalam, Marathi all looked forward to have their own state. The strongest protest, however, came from the Telugu speaking district of what was the Madras presidency. When Nehru went to campaign there during the general elections of 1952, he was met with black flags and slogans demanding, "We want Andhra." In October of that year, a veteran Gandhian named Poti Shiramallu went on a hunger strike demanding the formation of Andhra state to protect the interest of the Telugu speakers, and as the fast went on, it attracted much support. The Hartal and Bands were observed in many towns. On 15 December 1952, the 58 days into his fast, Poti Siramallu died. As the newspaper put it, the news of the passing away of Siramallu engulfed entire Andhra in chaos. The protest was so widespread and intense that the central government was forced to give in to the demand. On October 1st, 1953, the new state of Andhra came into being that subsequently became Andhra Pradesh. After the creation of the Andhra, the other linguistic communities also demanded their own separate states. A States Reorganization Commission was set up, which submitted its report in 1956, recommending the redrawing of district and provincial boundaries to form the compact provinces of Assam, Bengal, Oriya, Tamil, Malayalam, Kannada, Telugu speakers respectively. The large Hindi-speaking region of North India was also to be broken up into several states. A little later in 1960, the bilingual state of Bombay was divided into separate states for Marathi and Gujarati speakers. In 1966, the states of Punjab was also divided into Punjab and Haryana. The former for the Punjabi speakers called Sikh, the latter for the rest who speak not Punjabi but the versions of Haryanvi or Hindi. A state ceased to be a princely state as and when its prince agreed to merge with India or Pakistan or was defeated. But many of these states were retained as administrative units until 31st October 1956. Hence, the category the erstwhile princely states for the period 1947-48 to 31st October 1956. The bridge on the Mahanadi River constructed to control the flow of water. The bridges and the dams became the symbol of development in independent India. State concerned with the government. Note that used in this sense, the word does not refer to different states which are found in a country. The work going on at the Gandhi Sagar Bandh. This was the first of the 4 dams built on the Chambal River in Madhya Pradesh. It was completed in 1960. Planning for development. Lifting India and Indians out of poverty and building a modern technical and industrial base were among the major objectives of the new nation. In 1950, the government set up a planning commission to help design and execute suitable policies for economic development. There was a broad agreement on what was called a mixed economy model. Here, both the state and the private sector would play important and complementary roles in increasing production, generating jobs. What specifically these roles were to be, which industries should be initiated by the state and which by the market, how to achieve a balance between the different regions and states was to be defined by the Planning Commission. In 1956, a second 5-year plan was formulated, and this focused strongly on the development of heavy industry like steel, on building of large dams. These sectors would be under the control of the state, and this focus on heavy industry and the effort at state regulation of the economy was to guide economic policy for the next few decades. This approach had many strong supporters but also some vocal critics. Some felt that it had put inadequate emphasis on agriculture, others argued it had neglected primary education, still others believed that it had not taken account of the environmental implications of economic policies. As Mahatma Gandhi follower Meera Behan wrote in 1949, by science and machinery, mankind may get huge returns for a time, but ultimately will come desolation. We have got to study nature, balance, and develop our lives within her laws if we are to survive as a physically healthy and morally decent species. Jawaharlal Nehru at the Bhilai steel plant. The Bhilai steel plant was set up with the help of the former Soviet Union in 1959, located in the backward rural areas of Chhattisgarh. It came to be seen as an important sign of the development of the modern India after independence. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was a great supporter of the planning process. फिर क्या है, Jawaharlal Nehru and Krishna Menon arriving at the United Nations. The Krishna Menon and led the Indian delegation to the UN between 1952 and 1962 and argued for a policy of non alignment. Leaders of the Asian African countries meet at Bandung, Indonesia. 1955. Over 29 newly independent states participated in this famous conference, the Bandung BENDUNG conference, to discuss how the Afro Asian nations would continue to oppose colonialism and Western domination. The search for an independent foreign policy. India gained freedom soon after the devastation of the Second World War. At that time, a new international body, United Nations, formed in 1945. The 1950s and 1960s saw the emergence of the Cold War, that is, power rivalry and ideology conflict between USA and the USSR, with both countries creating military alliances. This was also the period when the colonial empires were collapsing and many countries were attaining independence. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, who was also the foreign minister of newly independent India, developed the Free Indians foreign policy in this context. The non alignment formed the bedrock of this foreign policy. Led by statesmen from Egypt, Yugoslavia, Indonesia, Ghana, and India, the non aligned movement urged the countries not to join either of the two major alliances. But this policy of staying away from alliances was not a matter of remaining isolated or neutral. The former means remaining aloof from the world affairs, whereas non aligned countries such as India played an active role in mediating between the American and Soviet alliances. They tried to prevent war, often taking humanitarian moral stand against war. However, for one reason or another, many non aligned countries, including India, got involved in wars. By the 1970s, large number of countries had joined the non-aligned movement. The nation 60 years on. On 15th August 2007, India celebrated 60 years of its existence as a free nation. How well has the country done in this time, and to what extent has it fulfilled the ideals set out in its constitution? That India is still united and that it is still democratic are achievements that we might justly be proud of. Many foreign observers had felt that India could not survive as a single country, that it would break up into many parts, with each region or linguistic group seeking to form a nation of its own. Others believed that it would come under military rule. However, as many as 13 general elections have been held since independence, as well as hundreds of states and local elections. There is a free press as well as independent judiciary. Finally, the fact that people speak different languages or practice different faiths has not come in the way of national unity. On the other hand, deep divisions persist. Despite constitutional guarantees, the untouchables, they are now referred to as Dalits, face violence and discrimination. In many parts of rural India, they are not allowed to access to water sources, temple, parks, and other public places. And despite the secular ideals enshrined in the constitution, there have been clashes between the different religious groups in many states. Above all, as many observers have noted, the gulf between the rich and the poor has grown over the years. Some parts of India and some groups of Indians have benefited a great deal from economic development. They live in large houses and dine in expensive restaurants. They send their children to expensive private schools and take expensive foreign holidays. At the same time, many others continue to live below the poverty line, housed in urban slums or living in remote villages on the lands that yield little. They cannot afford to send their children to school. The Constitution recognizes equality before the law, but in real life, some Indians are more equal than others. Judged by the standards it set itself at independence, the Republic of India has not been a great success, but it has not been a failure either. The Dharavi in Bombay is one of the world's largest slums. What happened in Sri Lanka? In 1956, the year the states of India were recognized on the basis of language, the Parliament of Sri Lanka, the then Ceylon, introduced an act recognizing Sinhala as the sole official language of the country. This made Sinhala the medium of instruction in all the states, schools, and colleges, in public examination, and in the courts. The new act was opposed by the Tamil speaking minority who lived in the north of the island. For several decades now, a civil war has raged in Sri Lanka, whose roots lie in the imposition of the Sinhala language on the Tamil speaking minority. And another South Asian country, Pakistan, was divided into two when the Bengali speakers of the East felt that their language was being suppressed. By contrast, India has managed to survive as a single nation, in part because the many regional languages were given freedom to flourish. Hat Hindi has been imposed on South India in the way that Urdu was imposed on East Pakistan or Sinhala on the northern Sri Lanka. India too might have seen civil war and fragmentation. Contrary to the fears of the Jawaharlal Nehru and Sardar Patel, the linguistic states have not threatened the unity of India. Rather, they have deepened this unity. Once the fear of one's language being suppressed has gone, the different linguistic groups have been content to live as part of the larger nation called India. That's all for today. Thank you.